Hey there everybody, Eric from Outer Limitless coming at you today with another video. Now today's video was made possible by the people at GearBest. First and foremost, I'd like to say thank you very much to GearBest for providing these products for review today. Now in today's video we're going to be taking a look at a couple of products that have some very close similarities, but at the same time also some differences. This is a class of product that I haven't really covered yet. This is something that I sort of needed in my backpacking kit, and I really wanted the opportunity to get my hands on a couple of different products so I could compare and contrast them. So GearBest worked with me to package together a couple of products that you're probably going to like and hopefully be interested in. And so I figured I'd get these things unboxed here and take a quick look at them. So first we have a headlamp here. This is the HR20 by Imalent. And second, the HC30 by Nitecore. Now again, as I mentioned, these two products are in a class of product that I have yet to review. So I'm really happy for this first time to be able to review some headlamps. And as I said, I kind of needed them. I mean, I have headlamps, but they are not really today's current standard. And so to get a couple of really nice, high, powerful, and quality headlamps to me is definitely a great thing. So again, I'd just like to say thank you to the people at GearBest for providing these and for shipping them to me really quick so I can get this review underway. And so today is really going to be sort of a first look at these two products. We're going to take them, look at them side by side, get an understanding of kind of how they stack up against each other. We'll look at the overall quality of the build, the overall features and functions, and how these things kind of relate to one another. So the first headlamp I'm going to take a look at is this Imalent HR20. This is a 1000 lumen headlamp. Has some great looking features, some things that are a little bit unique to this over other products, which is part of the reason why I gravitated towards this. It looks to me to be about the optimum output for most backpacking or camping applications and for different things like that. I mean, I feel like personally, for the most part, on a headlamp, I don't need a huge amount of output. So 1000 lumens, I mean, that is just plenty of light, way more than I typically would need. And so I thought this would be a great product to take a look at and get my hands on. Now, not that the packaging is the most important thing, but when a package is in good shape or is a quality package, that's always a plus. You know, I think there's some attention to detail here, putting nice little images of the product being used. Overall, decent box here. Shows some specifications on the outside. Now, part of the reason why I bring this up is that I have seen some lesser known brands and their packaging is just kind of suspect, and that just sort of gives me an initial impression on what the actual quality of the product would be. So here right off the get-go, there's nothing that jumps out at me and really has me nervous in terms of the overall quality. So I think that's just a good thing to note. Now moving forward and opening up the product, sliding it out here. See the flashlight, a charging cable, the actual headband. This is some spare O-rings and a pocket clip, and also the instructions. Now, for the most part, it does appear as though these instructions are in Chinese. I can probably make some assumptions as to what they're talking about based on the diagrams. Oh, but as you open it up, this is in English. So one side is in Chinese and the other side is in English. So this actually should be pretty good. I should be able to give you some good specifications and some information on this. So taking a look at this here, this does have a high mode of 1000 lumen output and a low mode of 1 lumen. Now you may notice that there are no other modes in between. That's because this particular light has an infinite adjustability. So there's a dial that allows you to change the variability of light from the lowest mode all the way to the highest mode with pretty much every setting in between. And that is part of the reason why I really gravitated towards this light. I thought that was an interesting feature and something I definitely wanted to try out. It's something that's not really too common across any other lights that I know of, and so I thought this would be a great opportunity to try something new. Now this flashlight claims to have a 225 meter beam distance, which equivalates to 11,200 candela. This flashlight does have an impact resistance of roughly 1.5 meters, and it claims to be IPX8 water resistant. Okay, so now let's take a quick look at this Nitecore. Again, very similar in terms of the packaging, where you have just, these pictures of the product being used on the side, basic information on the back, and those specifications. Now, in fact, comparing the two, you'll see they're very similar in that regard, pretty much sharing the same information and the same locations on these boxes. So similar to the Imalent flashlight, this is also a 1000 lumen headlamp. Now I did that on purpose because I wanted two lights that were very similar in terms of their characteristics so that we could compare them and really have somewhat of an apples and apples comparison. So moving forward here and removing the product from the box, we have a very similar overall box construction and layout. Here's the instruction card, a small warranty card, pocket clip, spare O-rings, and also a spare mode switch, the headband, and the actual flashlight. Now in the same fashion as the Imalent flashlight, these instructions come one side in Chinese and the other side in English. Now where this Nitecore flashlight does have multiple modes and does not necessarily have that infinite mode, they do list all the different run times and lumen outputs throughout the entire range of the flashlight. So you'll see here the maximum turbo is considered to be 1,000 lumens. There's a high mode of 400 lumens, a mid mode of 210, low mode of 70, and the lowest of 1. So in reality, we end up with pretty much the same lumen output, from lowest being 1 lumen and highest being 1,000 on this flashlight as the Imalent. So that'll be a real good test to take a look at the two side by side and see how these compare. Now you can also see the run times. This is capable of taking one 18650 or two CR123s, so the output is the same, yet the runtime does differ a little bit. You get slightly better performance out of that 18650. Now you'll see here that the Nitecore is putting out a 162 meter beam, which is the equivalent of 6,600 candela. So in that regard, that Imalent flashlight is quite better. So I'll be interested to see how they really do perform. Now you also have, in a similar fashion, the 1.5 meter impact resistance and that IPX8 water resistance. Now taking a quick look at these flashlights side by side, you'll see here is the Imalent and here is the Nitecore. They are very, very similar in size, but the Imalent flashlight is a slight bit longer, and that seems to be primarily due to the way that the mechanism on the end of the flashlight is hanging off the end. So this is the adjustment for that infinite adjustment, whereas the button for the Nitecore is right on the end as well. But that mechanism does add just a tiny bit of extra length. Now what you get with the Imalent flashlight is an 18650 rechargeable battery and a charging cable. This particular flashlight is a USB rechargeable flashlight, and it does come with the battery and the charging cable. So that is a very good thing. Now, unfortunately, this Nitecore is not a rechargeable flashlight. It does not come with a battery, and it does not come with a charger. So in order to get this thing up and running, you would also need to buy yourself a battery and potentially a charger. Now I do happen to have the Nitecore IntelliCharger. This is the 2-battery version. I've had this for a while, and so I am able to proceed with using this. But if I didn't have that, it's additional things that I would have to buy just to get this flashlight running. Now one of the things that I've heard about the Imalent flashlight and other reviewers complaining about is that they felt as though the overall thickness of the metal was quite thin. Now, I'm going to just really quickly take some measurements of both the Nitecore and the Imalent flashlight. I have here just a little set of calipers that I'm going to use to take a quick measurement of the thickness of the metal. Now, what I can tell you is just right off the get-go, these both feel pretty much to me roughly about the same weight. There is nothing really significant about one versus the other making it feel heavier. In other words, if this one was significantly heavier, maybe I'd say, yeah, sure, maybe the metal's a little bit thicker. But at the same time right now, I really don't see that. So let's take the caps off here and just get a real quick measurement on the thickness of the metal. With the Nitecore, take a quick measurement here. I'm going to measure both of them directly on the threads, getting it as square as I can. So the thickness of this is roughly, if you can see it there, about 1 millimeter. It is a tiny little bit thicker than 1 millimeter. Take these calipers and get right on those threads, and literally, I mean literally the exact same measurement. So if you can see there, just a touch over 1 millimeter. With that initial measurement, I don't see anything really telling me one's any thicker than the other. So we have the Imalent here and the Nitecore here, and taking a look at that stock, I really am not seeing what people are complaining about in terms of the overall thickness of the stock on this Imalent flashlight. So now just taking a quick look at the LEDs and reflectors of these two flashlights. We have the Imalent on your left and the Nitecore on your right. Now the Imalent headlamp uses a Cree XP HI LED, and the Nitecore uses a Cree XM L2 U2 LED. Now I'll be honest with you, I'm not 100% sure what the exact difference is. I am certainly not a flashlight expert. I pretty much just look at these things in terms of what their overall use and capabilities are and what the features and functions are and how that works for me. I am not an expert in this, so I cannot necessarily tell you the difference between these LEDs, but we're going to take a look at them in terms of the overall beam pattern and overall brightness a little bit later on. But that just gives you an idea of these two reflectors. They are both a clear reflector, nice glass, overall very similar in size. These have a nice smooth reflector. They do not have any orange peel, so I would expect these to be a pretty decent thrower and not necessarily quite as much in the way of flood. Now looking at both of these flashlights, they are both an anodized aluminum. They have some nice knurling on the body. I kind of tend to prefer the looks of the Imalent just a little bit. I think it has a little more of a unique look to it. I mean, either way, it's not a big deal. Neither one of these are kind of make or break it in my mind, but I do kind of like the look of the Imalent overall. Now the Nitecore does seem to have a little bit better in the way of a heat sink on the back of the device, so maybe that'll help keep it a little bit cooler, a little bit longer. It does not appear as though the Imalent has any sort of heat sink on the back. Now I don't know exactly what this pattern is, if that is an attempt at a heat sink or if it's just something for a little bit of aesthetics. I really am not too sure, but it's definitely a unique look. Taking a look at the tail cap, both of these are pretty similar in terms of the overall size. The flashlights are very similar in diameter and have pretty much a very similar function in that regard. So for example, either one of these are able to be stood up on the tail with ease. No real big deal there. Both of them stand up. Both of these seem to have a somewhat anti-roll design, basically because of the shape of the head. When you go to put these down, neither one of them really tend to roll away because of the flat spot on the head. The only real difference being here that the Imalent flashlight does seem to have a little bit of an anti-roll pattern on the tail cap, whereas the Nitecore does not necessarily have that same sort of detail. Now at this point, this is where these two flashlights really start to bring each other apart. The Imalent having that infinite adjustment wheel on the top, and the Nitecore having a push button mode. So at this point, really, that is one of the major differences in terms of the overall features. And then the next part, as I had already mentioned, the ability for this Imalent flashlight to be charged via USB. Now, as you can see here, the Imalent flashlight has an on-off button, and then underneath this little flap here, you end up with your USB charging port. It's basically a micro USB. So as I mentioned, the Imalent flashlight did come with a battery, but unfortunately for this particular test, I only have one of these. So what I've opted to do is use two identical 18650s. Now these are Olight batteries, but they are what I had. They are both charged up and both in the exact same condition, so that at this point, once I put these in both flashlights, I'll have a real true apples and apples comparison of performance. So now taking a quick look at these two headlamps in terms of their overall beam pattern, you can see the Imalent flashlight on the left and that Nitecore on the right. Now both of these right now are set to the lowest function, which would basically be 1 lumen, and you can see that they are very, very similar. Now here with the Imalent, you can see there's a little bit of a tighter hot spot and a little less in the way of flood, whereas with the Nitecore, it's just a little less tight on the overall spot and a little bit more flood overall. So very similar beam patterns, but just a tiny bit different. The Imalent seems to be a little bit of a whiter, brighter white, but I think that's primarily because of how tight the hot spot is there, versus on the Nitecore it's a little spread out, and my wall is blue, so you're seeing a little of the bluish color behind it. Now there's no real easy way for me to get between the modes to show you some of the intermediate modes here, simply because if you look at the Imalent, this is an infinite adjustability in terms of the brightness adjustment. So I don't have a real good way of figuring out what halfway is. So what I thought I'd do at this point is just go all the way up to full brightness, and I will do that on both. Now here with both flashlights on the highest mode, you can see the Imalent here on the left and the Nitecore here on the right. And just as I was saying, you can see just a little bit of a tighter pattern for the Imalent here versus a little bit more of a floody pattern. I mean, if you look at the size of this overall hot spot here, it is just a little bit wider than it is here on the Imalent. So the Nitecore tends to be a little bit softer and a little bit more floody, maybe better for some close-up stuff. And this Imalent, again, like a little more of a hot spot here and just a little bit better, it seems, in terms of throw. Now, I'm not overly surprised when looking at the candela rating. It did seem as though this Imalent flashlight was going to be a little bit more of a thrower and that this Nitecore was going to be a little more floody. So both of them, again, with 1,000 lumen output and really some slightly different characteristics in terms of the overall beam pattern. Now these two flashlights do differentiate greatly in the way that you operate them. So for example, on the Imalent, it is an on-off button that you simply push once, and when you push it, it basically turns on at the level that you have set this dial to. So that, in a way, is really cool. I mean, I like that because if you think about this in terms of a headlamp, you know, you may not want the lowest mode. I mean, for me, if I'm going to be using this at nighttime and I'm going to say get up in the middle of the night, go to the bathroom, something like that, I'm going to want to have this thing maybe dialed in somewhere in the middle. I mean, I'm not going to want it all the way on super high because I'll get myself some night blindness, but all the way too low is simply going to be too low to do what I need to. So, I'll probably find I set this somewhere in the middle. And so let's just say I have it halfway dialed in here, and I just push the button once, it shuts off, push the button again, comes back on, off, on. Very simple in that regard. And so then to get to the specialty modes, basically at that point you're doing a long press between them and then back off. So really, in terms of the overall function and features and the way that you operate the light, I like it very much. I love the idea of the dial and that infinite brightness setting. Really cool. Now again, the Nitecore is much different. Single press every time comes onto the lowest mode. And so, I don't know what I think about that. I mean, I can tell you, I think I'm glad it's not the brightest mode, but to be on the lowest mode is like, oh, okay, not too big of a deal, but I don't know, just, I like the ability to kind of set it where you want it, like it is on that Imalent light. I mean, that's just a really nice feature. But anyway, to go through the modes at that point, you single click from brightness to brightness to brightness, increasing the whole time until it cycles all the way back around again to that lowest mode. Now when the flashlight is off, if you press and hold, it will go from low to the highest mode almost instantaneously. So again, if I turn this off, which is a long press to turn this off, again, holding it down for a long period, almost a second, it will go to that turbo mode. So you can get to the high mode pretty quickly. It's not like you have to literally cycle between all the modes to get up there. So that's kind of nice. I mean, I do like the idea that, if you really wanted to get this thing to full tilt right away, you could just hit the button, keep your finger down, and it will go to that turbo mode. And then just again to turn off the flashlight, long press, and it's off. And on this Nitecore, a fast double press goes into the special modes, and then single clicking between these modes, once it's into that special mode, will go to SOS, beacon, and strobe. So in terms of the overall mode operation, I definitely have to give it to the Imalent. I mean, I really, on either one of these, don't necessarily want the special modes. So to have to like double press into them is kind of good, because I don't tend to double press my lights too often. I like on the Nitecore the ability to long press that button to get into the turbo mode, but just the infinite adjustability and the set it and forget it kind of nature of this Imalent is pretty sweet. I hope that this dial is really pretty easy to get to. I don't see it being a big deal. And so, I'm going to do a little bit of testing here to try this out and see how this operates while it's on my head. So speaking about while it's on my head, let's take a quick look at these headbands. They are a very similar construction overall, pretty much almost the exact same type of thing. They have a rubberized mount here that are both pretty much the same consistency to hold the flashlights in place. Both of these headbands have plenty of adjustability to fit it to any user's size head. But I do need to say overall that I think the quality of sort of the plastic pieces on the Nitecore is just a little bit nicer than the Imalent. It's just a slightly nicer design, a little bit nicer plastic. It's not really too big of a deal. I don't think that's a make or break sort of thing for me. But it's just an observation that, the Nitecore headband is just a touch nicer. Now fitting these units in the actual headband. So here is the Imalent. I guess you could really put these in either way you want. I'm trying to think about which hand I would tend to use to do the work. I'm right-handed, so maybe I would find that it's going to be easier for me to put this in righty. So pretty much just taking this light here and popping it in on this band. There's a couple of little like indexing sections here where this thing will kind of pop into place, and looks like it sits on there mighty fine. So again, just taking a quick look at how this Imalent sits in here, you'll see that little groove. I think that's the same groove we'll use for the pocket clip, but it looks like this headband really just fits right in there nicely. So anyway, that seems to be good and firm, and hopefully this will hold the light at the appropriate angle. And in a very similar fashion, popping in this Nitecore, getting it fit onto this little rubber holder here, sliding the light down into place. Now this Nitecore does also have some grooves that help the light to index in the appropriate place. I'm setting it up for right hand operation, and that looks pretty good. Now taking a quick look at the Nitecore, as I mentioned, this also has some grooves that allows this rubber band to kind of index in the appropriate location, and again hold the light exactly where you need it to. So now that I have these two lights side by side in their headbands, I'm just going to twist the light a little bit just to see how it feels. And I can tell you that this rubber on the Nitecore is quite firm. Now that's a good thing because it's going to hold the light at an appropriate angle once you adjust it, and hopefully won't slip over time. So that is definitely feeling pretty nice on the Nitecore. Now in a similar fashion, doing the same thing with the Imalent, it is very loose. I mean, I'm not gonna say it's extremely loose, but I'm gonna say quite loose. And that has me a little bit nervous. You know, I really hope this thing holds tight and does not allow it to slip out of sort of adjustment over time. So if you look here, it's hard for you to see this, but if I try to do like a one-handed twist, it's really not twisting for me very easily. I mean, I really need to kind of apply some funny pressure to get this to twist with, you know, just one hand. Whereas this Imalent, I mean, it moves really easy. And look, I mean, I'm doing that with ease. So that just gives you a little example of how I think this Nitecore headband is going to perform a little bit better than this Imalent headband. And not, again, maybe not a game changer or a deal breaker, but that could be a pretty important thing when you get to actually using these. So let's just talk real quick about fit and comfort. Here I have the Nitecore headlamp, and I'm fitting it on my head. Now I've done a little bit of adjusting to this already to try to get it close, and I'm just going to fine tune it real quick here. Now I can tell you it was pretty easy to get this adjusted pretty nicely to my head. Not a big deal, nothing really too difficult in terms of the overall way that you adjust it. Now I find that overall feels pretty good on my head. I don't think it's anything that's really going to bother me. I have it just a touch on the snug side right now, but that's okay. It's going to hold it nice and firm where I need it to, and if I had to, I could loosen it up. Now I can see the light just a tiny bit out of the peripheral vision of my eyes, but that's not necessarily even a bad thing either, as long as once I turn it on, yeah, the light's not going to bother me. I don't see any light until I put my hand right there, so that's not a bad thing, and it feels reasonably comfortable on my head. So in terms of my ability to easily and quickly get to the functions of the light, it's not a big deal. Again, with the overall ability to adjust the beam height, really pretty easy, feels nice and firm and pretty good. So overall, the Nitecore is definitely looking good. And so now, in a very similar fashion, the Imalent flashlight, putting this on my head in a very similar fashion. I can see this out of the peripheral vision of my eyes. Now I can see this Imalent just a little bit more. I don't know if I have it sitting just a touch lower on my head, or if it's just that the flashlight is just a tiny bit bigger. But again, quickly and easily finding the modes, my ability to adjust the light, and that dial really is quite simple to get to. You know, I heard people saying that this dial was hard to find. I guess I don't see that at all. I mean, really, you just reach right up and it's right on your thumb. I mean, for me, it's really super quick and easy. Single button push to turn the light off, single button to turn it on, and scroll through the modes. The looseness of the band, I don't think is going to cause any problems. It doesn't seem like, you know, this thing's really going to rattle itself around to the point where the beam changes direction on me. So I'm a little less concerned with that maybe now than I was when I first, oh, if you see that, it did move. Watch this. That is probably not good. Let me do the same thing with the Nitecore. Alright, so now with the Nitecore, I'm gonna long press, I'm gonna put it on turbo so you can see it. I'm gonna intentionally angle it about 45 degrees up and shake my head. Now this thing's gonna rip itself off of my head, I think, before the light even moves. So that, as I was saying, is really important. I mean, look, I'm gonna put the beam straight out in front of me. And at this point, apart from the headband wanting to pop off a little bit, that beam is pointed straight out. So, ultimately, my point being, I am a little bit suspect of this Imalent headband and its ability to really hold this in place if you're using it for something a little more rigorous. I'm hoping that in a hiking situation, this will not be a problem. You know, if you were doing a low light hike and you needed a flashlight and you were going to use a headlamp and you were bounding around and scrambling over rocks and stuff like that, I would be a little bit suspect that this might not hold it really firm. And I mean, the last thing I want to have to do with a piece of gear is modify it and, you know, beef this thing out and thicken up the flashlight or add tape or stupid things to get this to stay in the right place. So that really, I'm a little bit disappointed at that. I really was digging this Imalent flashlight, and that one little hiccup right there is pretty important. So, I don't know. My mind has shifted just a little bit on this thing. Alright, and now just to wrap this thing up with some outdoor performance, here I have the Imalent on the 1000 lumen turbo mode. Taking a quick look at the overall beam pattern. Now again, as I mentioned, you can see that hot center with a little bit of flood to the outside. So a very pinpointed hot center with a little bit of flood. And you can see as this falls off how quickly that hot spot kind of goes away, and you do lose your ability to kind of see detail in these other areas. But that hot spot is quite nice, quite bright, and looks like a really solid throw. And now for the Nitecore. Again, a decent hot spot, but a lot wider. And as you look here, it really does illuminate a wider area a lot better. So this may be better suited for more of a camp application than the Imalent. I mean, both of them are pretty sweet, but at the same time, this does give you a little bit better overall general illumination. And now for the two lights side by side, you have the Imalent on the left and the Nitecore on the right. And just as I had been mentioning the whole time, you can see this just has a slightly smaller, tighter, hot beam in the middle than the Nitecore, just a little bit wider. And as I pan up into the scenery here, just the way the two kind of illuminate side by side. So alright guys, there you have it. A real quick look at two very nice and well featured headlamps. Both have pros and cons, things that are working for them, or you know, things that maybe aren't quite so great, but at the same time, this is not make or break stuff for either one of these. Now, I think ultimately I tend to prefer most of the functions and features on this Imalent, but at the same time, obviously you cannot deny the quality of the Nitecore. So, all things considered, it's a real toss-up. I mean, both of these are pretty worth considering. If I had to make my choice, apart from the headband issues, I think I'd still ultimately go with the Imalent. You have to really back yourself up and say, okay, you know, look at the money for both of these things, and then the Imalent comes with the battery. It's a USB rechargeable flashlight versus this Nitecore. Every time you're going to have to pop the batteries out and then put them in an additional charger that you may or may not have, and then if you don't need it, you got to buy that too. So, all things considered, some really great flashlights, but like I said, I do have to give it just to the edge to the Imalent. For basic features. The overall construction seems to be fine. I like the beam pattern. This infinite adjustability on the brightness is really slick. I like that a lot. And so, you know what? For a company that I hadn't heard too much about, never really seen too much on Imalent, I have to say I'm pretty impressed. So alright guys, I hope you enjoyed an in-depth look at the HR20 from Imalent and the HC30 from Nitecore. I'd just like to say thank you very much again to GearBest for providing these two wonderful products for review. I think this was definitely a very successful comparison. Two very similar products in a similar class and with overall very similar features, and it was an interesting experiment. Neat to get my hands on both of these and to really try them out. So alright guys, thanks for stopping by. I hope you like what you saw. I hope you found it a little bit informative. If you like what you saw, please like, share, and subscribe. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Take care now. I'll see you soon.